Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session. Before we start, I'm just going to give a couple of Zoom reminders. So if you experience any technical issues, please call 1-888-799-9666 and choose option 2. Your audio will be connected through your computer or through a call-in number. If at any time you have problems with your audio, just let me know and in the chat box and I can call you in. Please submit your questions at any time in the chat box at the bottom of your screen. You can also press the raise hand icon, which should also be at the bottom of your screen, and wait to be called upon to ask your question. Please turn off your camera and mute yourself as you enter the room, but if you're asking a question, please turn it on. The Zoom recordings, slides, and session summaries will all be posted on our website, thefdp.org, shortly after the meeting. So now I'm going to pass it off to Diana to kick off this session. Oh, you're muted. Yeah.
You'd think I would know I was muted. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending our update session. I am Diana Baglin. I'm coming to you from the University of Chicago. I'm with Chris McNitt of Penn State University, and together we are the co-chairs of the DTUA working group version 2.0. So now if you were lucky enough to attend the previous session about institutional and national data management issues, and you got that nice high-level view of how data is being thought of in the research community at large, Robert Hainish presented a really nice graphic that showed the life cycle of data management. The work of our working group belongs in that red wedge on the left side. We're a very small component of it, but we think we're pretty important because our role is to make it easier to do the sharing, the use, and the reuse of data that's generated in the course of doing research. So now, due to COVID and also changeover in leadership for this committee, it's been over a year since the working group has presented their efforts to the FDP at large. So we've got a lot of ground to make up, and we look forward to walking you through things that were completed by the previous iteration of this group, as well as the work done by the current members. Next slide, please. So I'd like to start with a little bit of gratitude. First, Sarah Moises, thank you so much for your excellent technical assistance. Thank you for keeping the FDP meeting on track and having everything move so smoothly. You've really made this easy for us. I'd like to thank Melissa Korf and Martha Davis, the previous chairs of this committee, because of their leadership, because of their hard work for several years. Chris and I truly are set up for success, and we have a really strong basis from which to build and grow and bring new guidance and new materials to the FDP. And finally, thank you to the approximately 35 members of the current working group. You guys show up every other week, you bring your insights, you bring your thoughts, and we have some really great discussions. And it's because of these folks that we're able to present this today. Next slide, please.
So yes, thank you, Di, for the introduction, and I also want to give thanks. I want to say that was a great thank you, and we are very appreciative of previous group as well as our current group. So I just wanted you to hear from me as well, so thank you. So welcome to the Working Group 2.0. I'm going to go over the agenda of what we're going to speak about today. We plan on speaking today about the overall DTUA working group, specifically about the following topics. We do have a call for assistance to all of you. We will touch on an overview of the progress of our progress as a group, This will include some information on new templates and samples, as well as some helpful guidelines or guidance that we thought may be good to present to the group as a whole. Now that we are no longer in the pilot phase and there's been more of an adoption of the DTUA, we thought it would be good to have maybe some discussion. We'll also discuss the current efforts of the group that the group is working on and the future plans of the working group. So next slide, please. So we need you. Do you have the special skills to create a PDF smart form? Do you have the time, and are you willing to volunteer to assist us with creating a new and improved FDP DTUA? We are looking for someone to help us create a DTUA that will work similarly to how the FDP Civil War actually currently works. If you do have these skills and you're willing to assist us with designing a smart template, I'm sure that not only would our group appreciate your efforts, but so would the FDP community as a whole. We would like for the attachment 2 to populate when it's chosen on the face page of the template. So if you do have these skills and you're willing to help, please contact us at dtua@thefdp.org. This email address goes to both Di and myself, and we'll be in touch with you. We know that this is a big ask, but if you already do have the skill set to create this form, it would be much faster to release to the FDP community than me trying to find the time to teach myself the program to develop the forms. As with most institutions, and to reference the previous session on the Great Resignation, we all know how valuable everyone's time is right now, and we are aware that there are offices that are short-staffed, and many people might not have the time to help. But we would greatly appreciate it if you are available and can make time to assist us. Again, if you do have these skills, please email dtua@thefdp.org, and we will be in touch. Next slide, please.
So now we're going to move into the portion of the talk where we cover the past accomplishments. The first 3 blue bullets on this list are accomplishments of the previous iteration of this group. We revised several parts of the data stewardship website so that information is easier to find and is presented in a more clear format. And we hope that if you haven't been to the data stewardship website in a couple of years, please come back for a visit and take a look. We think that you'll find it a lot easier to use. We're also looking forward to the announced changes to the FDP website as a whole, and we're excited that we can continue to improve it and update it as more items come out. In a minute, Chris will walk you through some new templates and samples, as well as additional attachment 2s that were created by the previous group. And then after that, we're going to talk about the updated FAQs. The new working group was formed, and we surveyed the new members for their top priorities so that we could make sure that we were really truly addressing concerns of the FDP community. I hope this doesn't disappoint you, but we will not be walking through a really granular analysis or overview of the DTUA template itself. If you were looking for something like that, Melissa and Martha did present this a few years ago, as well as a walkthrough of a few of the original attachment 2s. And we've provided a link at the bottom of the screen so that if that's the sort of guidance you're looking for, you can access it more easily. Next slide, please.
Okay, so templates and samples, as Di indicated earlier, this is located on the data stewardship page of the FDP website. We are hoping to eventually have a dedicated DTUA page once the website is reorganized, and to make it even easier to find everything. In one of the previous sessions Monday, I believe I heard that there is going to be an entire revamp of the website coming up, which is really exciting, and we're looking forward to seeing what that will entail. So since the DTUA was last presented at FDP, we have added additional attachment 2s. Attachment 2 is the data type that is being transferred under the DTUA. I believe that the last time this was presented, including in that demonstration video from Melissa and Martha, we only had attachment 2 for de-identified data, limited data sets, and other. We now have an attachment 2 for personally identifiable information under the common rule, under HIPAA, and under FERPA. We also wanted to touch on attachment 2 and other and its purpose. We would like to have everybody keep in mind that it's only intended to be used when your data does not fit into any of the other categories or when no specific data protection terms are required. The other attachment is not intended to be used to incorporate additional terms and conditions in excess of or in conflict with what has been agreed upon by the FDP membership. If you do have additional questions or on the other attachment, we ask that you please refer back to the FAQs. There really is a lot of really good, concise information that can assist with the attachments and which one you should be choosing for your specific data transfer needs. We now also have additional templates and samples also posted other than the OG DTUA. Yes, the working group did call it that at one point, but it is listed on the website as the one-way DTUA. So you ask, this is a good question, and I'm asking it, but what is the difference between a template and a sample? So the templates should not be changed. They have been circulated and approved by the FDP members. If your institution does make changes to the templates, please remember that if you do choose to modify them, that you must remove the FDP moniker. The samples can be changed. They include sections within them that are editable and allow for more latitude for modification or additional terms and conditions. Same as with the templates though, if you do modify from the drafts that are out there, please remember to remove the FDP moniker. So again, templates, no changes, samples changes can be made. This is why the templates are uploaded as PDFs and the samples are in Word documents. To go into the additional templates and samples that have been uploaded, we have added an additional template for the reciprocal DTUA. This is for a two-way sharing of data between two parties. Not much of a difference between the one-way and the reciprocal other than it is a two-way data share. The two samples that we have added are the collaborative DTUA. This agreement sample is for data sharing that involves more than two parties and data flows in multiple directions. This is a sample only. These relationships can be quite cumbersome and difficult to manage. This is the group's best effort to develop a working agreement for this type of scenario. Even when we were in development of this sample, it was quite an interesting discussion and conversation on how to do this contractually. It was actually kind of fun to hear all the different ideas and go back and forth. The other sample that has been uploaded is the COVID-19 DTUA. This was developed very quickly in the beginning of the pandemic. So quickly, in fact, I missed a few meetings and when I came back, it was complete. So it is meant to provide a it is meant to provide a transfer of data easily in order to address the urgent need to transfer data quickly and specifically for COVID-19 research. Hopefully, the sample agreement isn't in as much of demand as it was in the beginning of the pandemic. Even though this is a sample, editing and adding other terms and conditions or using it for non-COVID-19 research is discouraged.
And so we also want to thank Johns Hopkins University. This COVID-19 sample was based largely on their template that they came out with quite early in the template and in the pandemic. I'll also point out that the use of templates versus samples is very much aligned with how the subawards committee manages their documentation. So things that are more restricted are PDFs and things that are more open to change are Word documents.
We take a lot of cues from the subawards group, so thank you.
Yes.
So Since we have the whole group together, and this is a good avenue to have a discussion, we wanted to provide some additional guidance to assist with drafting the DTUA. Some common topics that have come up a number of times now that the DTUA is being more widely adopted. If you do have a topic that is confusing that we don't address in this discussion today, please feel free to put your question in the chat, to unmute yourself and ask the question live. We will try to address it at the end of the presentation, or please feel free to interrupt. Please also remember that a lot of this information I'm going to speak about today is also documented in the FAQs. Di will talk about that in the next slide. So if you do need additional guidance, please, we ask that you do also refer to the FAQs. For all the standard templates and samples, I know it's said a lot, and I think I've already said it 3 times, but we like to reiterate it a lot, that if changes to the terms and conditions are made, that you please remember to remove any references to the FDP, including the moniker on the face page. We also have a recommendation of flagging what changes you've made for the other institution to be able to see very clearly what has been changed from the standard template or sample language. This does help streamline negotiations.
Oh, yeah.
We also wanted to remind everyone that the DTUA's templates and samples are intended to facilitate the transfer of sharing of data between US-based nonprofit and or governmental organizations for research or public health purposes. They are designed to be flexible enough for use in sharing of multiple different types of data, which may be subject to different requirements under law and or regulations. The FDP DTUA, it may not be appropriate for every data transfer and use scenario. Please read the updated FAQs if you have questions on if the DTUA is appropriate for your specific data transfer needs. There's a lot of helpful information there that can assist you with this decision. And Di, please feel free to interrupt me if you have anything additional to add.
I think you're covering all the points today.
We'll try. Another tip that we wanted to point out is that when drafting the DTUA, most of the text currently in the boxes are for guidance purposes. We do ask that you remember to remove the guidance text prior to sending the draft agreement to the data recipient. Hopefully, again, if we get a volunteer and we get a new smart DTUA, we can have this information located in a tooltip as opposed to being inside the boxes, which will help with preventing DTUAs being sent and signed with the help text included.
Yeah, as nice as it is to be able to ship off the attachment 1 to your PI and ask them to fill it in, sometimes though, they'll think that you filled it in for them.
Yes, because they don't realize it's guidance text.
Yeah.
Please also remember to include all the attachments. Since the DTUA does not currently populate, again, hoping for that volunteer to help us out with this, you will have to go out and grab the attachment 2 from the website and insert it manually. The field names are named the same, so the agreement number will populate once it is inserted into the DTUA, so that is helpful. Again, I've got my fingers crossed we're going to have a volunteer though. A question that seems to come up a lot, I know that we've heard it a lot in our working group, and I've also heard it outside of this group, and I thought that it was a good, this is a good place to bring this up, is that the question is if an institution is not a covered entity, but wants to send a limited data set, which attachment 2 should they use? This is currently listed in the FAQs under question 21. It may be renumbered after this presentation, but just a little guidance that if the provider is not a covered entity or a covered entity component, then HIPAA does not apply, and the attachment 2 for limited data sets or PII HIPAA should not be used. There is no equivalent to a limited data set under the common rule, and the data are either identifiable or de-identified. We ask that you please consult and work with your institution's privacy officer to learn how your institution implements these rules.
One thing that we've learned over and over in the course of this work is that different schools implement HIPAA differently, and they draw the bound. If they're a hybrid entity, they draw the boundary between the two sectors of their institution in different places, and so it can cause a bit of confusion when sharing data between different types of institutions with different policies. We just remind you that it is the data provider that gets to determine what type of data are being shared and what the downstream controls, should be applied.
Thank you. And next slide, please. So we wanted to touch on attachment 3 and its intended use. There seems to be a lot of confusion about attachment 3. Again, this information is in the frequently asked questions. I believe question 8 and question 14. Attachment 3 was created to allow the provider the option to authorize collaborator personnel to access the data via the recipient. So collaborator personnel are individuals who are employed by another organization and who are not under the direct control of either the recipient or the provider. These individuals, by nature of their participation in the project, need to have access to the data. So some examples that you may need to fill out collaborator personnel is are those affiliated with another entity, but are also has a DTUA with your organization for the project, such as a multi-site project. So if you are the only provider of the data sending it to 3 different institutions, but you want all the institutions to be able to collaborate, this is where you would check collaborator personnel. Say there's a visiting professor at your institution working while on sabbatical. And so they're not an employee of the university receiving the data. They can be authorized under the collaborator personnel. Individuals at an institution that might receive only a portion of the data from the recipient under conditions that would require a separate DTUA. You would check collaborator personnel here. The reciprocal template and the collaborative sample also have an attachment 3, which allows the parties to identify additional individuals with a need to access the data to conduct the project. Again, these individuals are employed by another organization and are not under the direct control of one of the parties to the agreement. Compared to the one-way template, there is a slightly different terminology that references these individuals. They're referred to as third-party personnel as opposed to collaborator personnel. I thought that bringing that up here today might help with the understanding of what the intention of collaborator personnel is as well. We do also suggest that attachment 3 is not to be used to list authorized data users from the recipient in the one-way template or the receiving party in the reciprocal template or the collaborative sample. More information on how the recipient and receiving party personnel are covered in the DTUA that can be listed. That is also listed in the FAQs, and that portion of it is under question 14. So to explain a little further, the agreement defines recipient personnel as the recipient scientists and the recipient's faculty, employees, fellows, students, and agents. There should not be a need for the provider to contractually permit each individual users by name to access the data. If the provider does require the information of the individuals who have access to the data, they're in question, and I'm going to direct you back to question 14. It suggests that the most feasible way to accomplish this with the DTUA is to require that the recipient provide a report of the individuals with access to the data. The reporting requirement or the instructions for the individual users to access the data, or any other special instructions on the qualifications of the individuals who access the data may be appropriately incorporated into the DTUA. For example, in the one-way DTUA, it's section 3 of attachment 1, which is the provider support and data transmission section. We also suggest this to avoid executing unnecessary amendments to change personnel lists each time. if you have a personnel list in the agreement, every time that personnel list were to change, you would have to execute another amendment. If you have concerns that you're sending or providing access to identifiable data, and you want to ensure that there's a list of approved users, please note that the recipient individual users of the data are tracked by the IRB protocol and approvals. The list of recipient personnel accessing the data should also be tracked in that same way. And again, I'm going to direct you back to the FAQs. And if you need a refresher on any of the information that was shared today, either on attachment 3 or any of the other suggestions, please refer back to those FAQs. Next slide, please.
So one more accomplishment of the previous working group is revamping and updating the DTA template FAQs. So again, if you haven't visited the Data Stewardship website in a few years, if you haven't looked at our FAQs, please come take a look. We believe that the information contained there will be easier to access and will be presented in a clearer format. For example, the matrix that Chris shared a couple slides ago, that is, one of the first content questions, and it's intentionally right at the top of the FAQ so that one of the more common questions can be answered right away. Additional changes are sprinkled throughout the whole document. It was really kind of an overhaul. We've updated information to make it more accurate, particularly in the context of the changing leadership. We also revised some questions so that they were worded in a more clear and accessible manner. So again, please stop by and check that out. I will caution you to make sure that you are looking at the correct bullet list on the website. There's another bullet list for the pilot program, which is closed, that has its own FAQs. If your eyes are old like mine and you're looking at this small text, it might be easy to pull up the wrong document.
I'll admit I accidentally clicked the wrong one all the time.
I think I always have to hit the second one. Next slide, please. And now we have a new working group. Melissa and Martha stepped down in February of 2021. Chris and I issued a call for participation in April, and we restarted meetings almost exactly a year ago. Our first priority was to determine what are our priorities. It was really important to us that the work we do in these meetings, because everybody is so busy, that we really focus hard on the main pain points that universities are facing around data sharing. And we heard loud and clear from our working group members that schools want guidance. And I think this is an indication of how far data use agreements have evolved. So when I started in research administration a little over a decade ago, data use agreements were perceived to be fairly simple and straightforward. And now they're considered some of the more difficult contracts that you can handle. The samples, the templates, the guidance, those all make the negotiation between the parties a lot easier. But there's still a due diligence that has to be performed before the contract can be signed. And what's happened at most schools is that, where before you might have checked with a couple of different issues, maybe IRB and one or two other things, there are now several offices that may be involved to analyze whether or not a data use agreement can be executed and whether or not we as an institution can comply with the terms of a particular data use agreement. We're also finding that data sharing plans by PIs are becoming much more complex, and we have to roll with that and we have to adapt to it. So having robust guidance that is both specific enough to be helpful and also general enough that it can be adapted to multiple situations and multiple institutional policies, has been a big focus for our group. Next slide, please. So what's this guidance that we're working on? Well, first we made a flowchart. Then we added a couple of extra questions to the FAQ, and Chris will talk about that in a moment. And finally, we are working on a compliance checklist that schools can use as they negotiate DTUAs. Next slide. So the top priority from participants in our working group was to put out some guidance around when is a DTUA actually required or recommended. This is presented in a flowchart form, and I need to give credit to the University of North Carolina and also my former institution, the University of Iowa. They both have really great flowcharts on their websites that served as kind of the seed material to make the new flowchart happen. Please watch for your email. Watch your email after the FDP ends. We will be sending the flowchart out to the contracts listserv as well as the data sharing listserv, and we would like to get feedback from your institutions. Again, we need feedback, one feedback per institution, please. And send it to dtua@thefdp.org, and that email address is in the chat. I want to point out that this flowchart is meant to enhance the pre-existing guidance documents. It's not intended to supplant anything. So it's possible that as you're looking at a particularly complex data sharing situation, you might bring up the flowchart on one side of your screen and the FAQ on the other, and bounce back and forth between the documents as you make your evaluations. So next slide, please. Oh, no. I apologize. The font on here is really small, but our intent is really to just show you what this looks like so that when it arrives in your email inbox, that you do not throw it away thinking that it's spam. Again, you'll see on many places on this document where we reference look at your institutional policy. Here again, we're bridging that space between being very specific, but also being very general so that it's both useful and adaptable. So.
I also want to interrupt a little bit for a second, and I want to give credit to Di's daughter, Olivia, who was nice enough to volunteer and assist us with the creation of the flowchart, I believe over her spring break. I know that all of you like to spend your spring breaks creating flowcharts, so we very much appreciate it, and it's lovely, and we're very happy to share it with the group to get feedback on.
Yeah. I'm not sure if volunteer was the right word, but you know, we'll go with it.
I'm saying volunteer.
Yeah. Next slide, please.
Okay, so adding additional questions to the FAQs. Some things that have come up. The first one we're going to be talking about, and I'm not going to try to read these verbatim, but we will be sending these two additional FAQs along with the flow chart to the data stewardship and contract listservs requesting feedback. So the first one is if the data cannot be linked to an individual, so what are the reasons the data provider might require that I obtain a review before receiving the data? Why are they making me complete an IRB review? I don't think I need one. Next slide, please. The next question is if the project isn't human subjects research or the data cannot be linked to an individual, why do I need a DTUA? So why are they, either the recipient or the providing institution, making me do this DTUA? For both of these questions, I mentioned this earlier, but we do like to emphasize that it is the position of the FDP that the data provider has the rights to determine the type of data being transferred, the downstream controls, such as the need for an IRB review, as well as the need for a DTUA to cover the transfer. It's the responsibility and the purview of the provider to determine what terms are required to be included in the DTUA. Please note that the provider may have very different institutional policies and procedures that you do, and that could account for some discrepancies in what you believe should be required. We suggest the best, if you think there are discrepancies, that to pick up the phone and have a conversation between the parties. It'll help clear up confusion. But I would like to say, always communicate. Sometimes, it's possible that you get something, or that it was communicated to the providing institution wrong of what you thought was being received. I know I've received DTUAs that were for identifiable information, and I've had a PI say, no, I don't want the identifiable data. And we had to go back and request modification because he didn't want to receive data that was that sensitive. So conversations between the parties will always help clear up any of that confusion.
I'd also like, I'd also like to point out that sometimes a DTUA is used in the case of coded data, because there does need to be some sort of written agreement between the parties when there is a key to the code, that key will not be exchanged between them. And for some institutions, the preferred method is to execute a DTUA, and for others, they may be willing to accept that assertion via email. Again, that is an institutional preference.
Okay, next slide, please.
So now what are we doing these days? Continuing on with the compliance theme, like I mentioned before, most institutions have indicated that while the actual contracting and negotiating is a lot easier now, there's a lot of work that has to go into drafting the DTUA and ensuring compliance before we can even start negotiations. And so we're working on a checklist to assist with that. Like I said before, we are now working with a lot more offices on our institutions, on our campuses, to determine if we are compliant with contract terms, to determine if data can be shared under certain circumstances. And so with this heightened level of complexity, most institutions are feeling a little unconfident regarding whether they've been completely circumspect in this analysis. So our hope is to create a checklist that, again, is both specific enough to be helpful, but general enough that it can be adapted to multiple institutional policies. Next slide, please.
I want to add to that real quick. No, it's okay. You can stay. I just wanted to add to that real quick. I know that there are different universities process DUAs, incoming and outgoing, differently. I know that at Penn State, our Office of Sponsored Programs we only handle incoming data, and our Office of Technology Management handles the outgoing data. So I myself am looking forward to this being drafted and being able to take it over to our OTM and ask for their input and see if they feel that this will help with them when managing outgoing data use agreements. So I think with the different universities handling things in different offices, like I was saying, and the complexity of it, the more we can do to help assist with the process, I think the better that we will be as a community.
Very good. Thank you.
Now we can go on to the next slide. Sorry, Sarah. So future work, what are we going to be planning on working on? So we do plan on working on a revised one-way DTUA and developing a version 2.0. This did not come up as a high priority when we surveyed the group. So kudos to Melissa and Martha and previous working group. It was not on anybody's radar initially. They like what we have out there. So it is on our radar to eventually take another look at it, though, with the approvals on the Subaward Attachment 7. We do plan to review and potentially realign some of the language that was approved on the Attachment 7 with the DTUA to be more consistent. Hopefully, if we do get that volunteer, that by the next meeting, we may have a smart DTUA to test. Yeah, fingers crossed. Additionally, with that smart form and with the version 2.0, we are hoping that it will assist with clarification on attachment 3 and collaborator personnel within the DTUA itself. Please feel free, if you currently have feedback on the DTUA, to send it to dtua@thefdp.org. We can start tracking your requests now. We can start a board and we can discuss within the working group the relevancies and what people are asking for, and see what we might need to do in version 2.0. We are going to look at, there is currently on the website a sample intake form. We are going to look at a revised sample intake form for processing and routing DTUAs for review. We have requested for the working group to provide their sample intake forms. We'll be redacting the institution information that it comes from and taking a look at them as a group. We're going to try to come up with best practices on the information gathered to review a DTUA. If you are not part of the DTUA working group, but your university does have an intake form, and you would like to provide it to us to assist with this discussion, please email it to dtua@thefdp.org, and we'll add that to our pile of intake forms. We'll redact your institution's information before we review it as a group. And we will consider that as a helpful resource for us. We also do plan on strategizing for increased adoption of the DTUA to help streamline data sharing. I can tell you that when I receive an unmodified FDP DTUA at Penn State, I kind of do a little bit of a happy dance. I know that I can turn these around quickly. We can get them logged in. We can get our data security plan set up. We can get them moved out very quickly. It's a big sigh of relief, other than getting those 20-page data use agreements that can take weeks, months to negotiate until we get onto a common ground. So I am very thankful for the DTUA, and I hope that other institutions have seen as much relief as I have. Originally, I used to be the only individual who processed DUAs. Now there's 3 of us, which I think also is an identifier of how much this has increased, and data has increased, and data use agreements have increased, and the adoption of the DTUA and how important it is. Go ahead, Di, I think you were going to say something.
I just want to say, I think it also speaks to the work of the original group that for accepting incoming data, our last survey indicated that we had about 80% of institutions willing to use the FTP DTUA. It's a little bit lower for outgoing data. Institutions tend to be very conservative about what they will allow in their terms and conditions when they're sending, their hard-earned data out into the world. So I think that high level of adoption is fantastic, but it would be nice to increase that, and it would be nice if we could have this used more often for outgoing data.
We have, I think, one of the suggestions on our board about this strategies for increased adoption is what do you say to your general counsel when they don't want to adopt the FDP DTUA? And I can tell you, I've butt heads with my general counsel on it, and it's amazing how in a few years' time, how opinions can change when the demand increases. And it also is, I remember bringing a question from our general counsel to our working group and asking Melissa, I said, well, our general counsel doesn't like that the DTUA says this. And she very clearly pointed out that, you know, as the data becomes more sensitive, the restrictions become more restricted in attachment 2. And being able to take that to him and show it to him, we are now getting much more acceptance at Penn State, and that makes me happy as well, because I not only love this group, but it's a great tool to be used and accepted across the nation. We also plan to continue to work with our parent group, the Data Stewardship Group, and coordinating efforts with them, including addressing upcoming federal data sharing requirements, such as the upcoming new data sharing policy from NIH, and if that will have an effect on the use or structure of the DTUAs. We also consider this an ongoing effort to ensure that we provide timely assistance and guidance as needs change throughout the community and the nation. Please always feel free to reach out to us at dtua@thefdp.org if you do have ideas, questions, concerns, or if you have any kind of feedback of any kind. We will make sure that we communicate all feedback with the group as appropriate. If we don't have any answers, we can elevate it to the data stewardship group if that's the more appropriate group to bring the questions to. I think that's it. That's all I have for now. Di?
I think, thank you so much, Chris. You did an excellent job here. I guess the only thing is to open it up to the group and see if anyone has any questions, comments, concerns.
I think we can do next slide also, please.
Yes, next slide, please.
I don't think I see any questions in the chat. If anybody wants to unmute and ask some questions, please feel free to do that as well.
I have a question. Hey there. Can you hear me?
Hi.
Yes.
Hi, it's Stephanie Scott. Thank you for all the work that you guys have done. This is kind of a bit of a discussion question since you brought up intake forms. I would love to hear from other institutions how they're dealing with tracking and managing the status of their DTUAs. So are you using a database for tracking? Are you using a homegrown system? Are you literally using spreadsheets? At Columbia, what we did, because we didn't have a database for tracking these and for, tracking the status of the negotiation and, tracking like the fully execution. I mean, so we've got two things going on. We literally have like a master tracker spreadsheet. And eventually I think we plan to do some kind of homegrown database, but we also created kind of like an electronic intake form. We're using Qualtrics for people, for either investigators or their administrators to initiate the request for a DUA or an MTA. Actually, we're using it for both. And it asks a series of questions. And depending on whether it's incoming data, outgoing data, and what kind of data, then it just keeps continuing to ask questions. And then it will, once they complete the intake form, what happens is they will, an email goes out to our contracts team and to the person making the request. Hey, here's your confirmation. But, I still feel like it's a workaround. The Qualtrics form has been a godsend to us, but I still feel like it's a workaround for something more robust and complex. So I'd love to hear what other people are doing.
I can tell you what Penn State is doing. So we actually recently just adopted a Qualtrics form as well for intake. We call it our EDAR, our Electronic Data Acquisition Request. So we use that to kind of do a pre-review and gather initial information on what they think they're getting, you know, any security measures that they plan on having in place, et cetera. And that gets routed to our data request inbox, where it is logged into our grants management system, which is Penn State uses a homegrown system. We log it in as we would any other award, and we like to be very transparent when it comes to our negotiations. So we update our logs with everything that happens. Our investigators have something called My Research Portal, where they can follow along on the negotiations. They can literally see in real time, as long as I update my log, where the status of the data use agreement is and what is happening, if it's been sent to our Office of Information Security, if I need to involve risk management or general counsel, they can follow along that way. So we do have a grants management system. Like I said, it is homegrown. I know there are ones that can be purchased that are out there. As a spreadsheet for tracking kind of terrifies me a little bit, but I don't know if that's just me.
Yeah, that sounds a bit overwhelming to me. I'll point you to the chat where colleagues of mine are chiming in. Here at UChicago, you can see in there we use the Huron system. I can tell you that at my former institution, the University of Iowa, we had a homegrown system that accommodated agreements. However, unlike the Huron system, it did not have customized questions for data intake or for intake of DTUAs. And so at the time I was leaving, we were developing a form that PIs would fill out that would be an attachment to that routing form. So I think having a database is, I think we're moving into a point in time where having these data use agreements in databases is really critical, because there are a lot of requirements that exist for the lifetime of either the project or that agreement. And it's important that you be able to go back and check, you know, am I compliant with the IT terms? Am I compliant with the data protection? You know, at what point am I supposed to destroy the data, or am I supposed to return the data to its owner? And the requirements around managing data are only going to get more complicated. They're not going to get any easier.
Absolutely. I was gonna say the same thing, Di, when you started talking, is you know, we want to be able to say at any point in time that I can run a report and find all active data use agreements at Penn State, so that we can determine what level of data is where and where it's housed. You know, you don't want to be caught in a position where you have identifiable data that was received from another institution and you don't know where it's located, you don't know where it's stored, you're not sure that it's compliant with the agreement terms and conditions. And having that centralized system also gives other areas of the university access to that agreement and to be able to be compliant with its terms.
Thanks a lot. And I don't want to make it sound like we have like some flimsy spreadsheet. It's actually like a
I'm sure it's very robust.
It's actually a robust master tracker, and we are able to kind of pull some data from it, but it's complicated to explain. But it's not like using some of these software companies. I just wanted to hear what I just wanted to hear what other people were doing out there. It sounds like there are a lot of folks that are integrating into Huron or InfoEd and other, and it seems like others are also using the Qualtrics workaround for intake. Okay.
We recently switched over to it, and I can tell you I enjoy it. I think it actually works quite well, and you can program it to do a lot of things. So
yep. Thanks a lot.
Trying to look at the chat and see if there's.
So let's see.
Yeah, so I asked a question, this is Robert.
Thank
I
you.
asked a question related to demonstration, related to streamlined DUA process. Is there one in the works or has been in the works or will be in the works?
We can do that.
I want to say that there was a survey done. I believe it may have been part of the pilot project. And we did not get, so metrics around DTUA negotiations and contract negotiations in general are kind of tricky, right? It's kind of hard to establish a consistent start time and an end time across all institutions. Additionally, for DTUAs, it's really hard to, if you get your routing form and you're going through the information and you're setting up your DTUA and you send it out and you start negotiations, and then halfway through you find out that the PIs were not on the same page, you know, as Chris mentioned before, suddenly, you know, your negotiation timeline is artificially long, right? So it was the survey after the end of the pilot program did not focus on hard metrics, but it did focus on qualitative feedback from institutions. And it was pretty universal that the negotiating part was considered much easier after we implemented the DTUA. So can I point to something that says, you know, you're going to save 3 weeks? I can't. But I can point to qualitative feedback that says, you know, schools that are adopting this, the negotiation phase is shorter.
That's helpful. Thank you.
So there is a question. It would be helpful to have more standard text for data repositories. Many institutions are creating an entirely new agreement to the requirements of their federal award, and it takes an incredibly long time to go through all of these large data collection and long-term data storage projects mandated by a federal award. Can the FDP work with the federal agencies on universal requirements / expectations for these data sharing agreements? It's a good question. I know that I have seen repositories take the FDP DTUA and modify it. For the repository agreements, I'm not sure if we've ever been asked about a repository agreement before. Do you remember that ever happening?
So I have taken the FDP template and adapted it to a registry or a repository type of situation. After removing the branding throughout, making sure that was done. I've also participated in an effort at NCI through their SEER registries to create a specific type of a template that is based on the FDP, but it is modified for the particular use at NCI. And these, to elaborate a little bit, cancer registries across the country, as we know, collect data on all cancer incidences in their state. Those data are available to legitimate researchers, and the way that SEER-based registries are set up is that they have an application process where the PI will apply to request data, and it's done in a linkage format. So the PI will need to provide certain variables. The cancer registry will then match to additional variables in their database and then provide those back to the PI. So the template was modified to specifically accommodate that kind of an interaction. So I hope that made sense.
Right, I want to be cognizant of everybody's time. It is almost 4 o'clock, which I think is our deadline. If anybody does have any questions that we didn't address, please feel free to reach out to Di and myself, and we can get back to you. If you have any questions about the working group as a whole, or again, any feedback, please email us at dtua@thefdp.org. Thanks everyone for joining us today.
It was a great time today. Thank you.
Right, Sarah, I think there's another session after us. I apologize. I'm not
Oh,
sure.
No. You guys are completely
Are we
okay.
it?
Yeah. It's at 4:30. It's grants and CUSMA. So if you're interested, follow the confirmation email instructions, and we hope to see you guys all there.
Thanks
Thanks for
everyone.
joining us today.